Gomka.
Hi, I'm David Clark.
I'm Darielle Hill.
And so Darielle and David, you guys are new guests on our show. You've never been here before, so welcome. We're so glad to have you. Thanks for joining us. David, what do you do here?
I'm in sales. I'm a national relationship manager. I've actually been in the compliance space for about 15 years now.
Okay.
So I've been around the block and done a lot.
That's right.
Things have changed, but kind of followed those along the way.
Well, cool. We're glad to have you. And Darielle, you work in the hotline, right? What do you do?
Yes, I am a risk specialist.
Okay.
So I accept or I intake phone calls from employees and consumers who are calling to express concerns or compliments for companies.
So Darielle, you're the voice of the company, and David's the face of the company.
I guess.
That's what that is right here.
This is the face you want to be the company, but.
Well, we're so glad to have you. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about compliance in the news. So we're going over 3 different news articles that pertain to the compliance arena in a couple different industries. So veering outside of the healthcare industry, in addition to talking about that as well. So we are going to not do any live questions for this show. We're going to hold all those questions. If there are any questions, those will be posted to compliancelive@complianceline.com, that tongue twister. And if you missed our show last time, I don't know if you guys got to watch, but we did horror stories and it was really fun. It was our second annual horror stories, where we talked about physicians or just providers in the compliance space who were sanctioned but also had some really terrible things happen, not necessarily to them, but things that they caused to happen to other people. It's a good show in that we have a lot of fun doing it because we like to have fun, but definitely graphic topics. So please check it out if you haven't already. You can look and find those shows if you want to see horror stories or some other shows that we've done on our Facebook page. We might have some on Twitter as well, and then on our Go to Stage. So they're all there for you if you want to binge watch some Compliance Live. Yeah.
They are scary.
Yeah, it's seriously horrible.
Yeah.
So today we're going to start talking about, in the healthcare space, we're going to start talking about a compliance in the news story regarding a HIPAA violation or privacy issue. So in June of 2016, Elite Dental Care out of Dallas, Texas, one of their patients posted a review on Yelp. And they responded to that review with the patient's private health information. So that's including her last name, the services that she received, her treatment plan, her insurance information, and the cost of her services. So a full account of what happened when she was there. And I mean, that in itself is mind blowing.
Shocking.
Yelp's there to how do you like this dentist?
Right.
Not to talk about medical services. What, as an employer, what can you do to protect yourself from? Because we'll get into it, but this provider got in trouble, didn't get away with it.
Sure.
What do you do to protect yourself from situations like this?
Well, you have to have clearly defined policies around social media, especially today. Social media is invaluable, especially to organizations. So it's a necessary evil. But at the same time, you have to have policies for all of your employees and what they share personally on their social media feeds. But most organizations have their own social media feed. So they also have to be very prescriptive on what the employees that are managing those sites do. This is a prime case of something that is obviously way beyond the pale.
Sure.
I mean, it's one thing to kind of put things out there about the organization. It's another to, break laws and put patient information out there. And it appears in this situation, it was almost in a vindictive way. So not only are you risking the compliance aspect of your organization, but it's social media. When things go out there, they get shared, they can go viral, which would be the absolute worst case scenario. It's surprising we didn't hear about this before, we had to find it in the news. Learning about it in the news. So, it's your personal reputation and the organizational reputation that you're risking when you have people putting things out on social media in behest of your organization.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the key. When you're posting as an employee from an organization's page, you're posting as an organization too. So you got to be very careful. Darielle, within just all the calls that you get on a daily basis, I'm sure you hear a lot of HIPAA stuff, right?
Yes,
Just
I
of
do.
privacy anyway.
Yes, I do receive a lot of, reports about about HIPAA violations, where maybe a provider has disclosed personal information
Yeah.
about a patient to a party that should not have access to that information.
And is that like, I know that you don't take all of our calls, so you're not the only voice, but have you ever heard of a situation where this was disclosed on a social media page or on some sort of public forum like this was?
I actually have heard of a situation where, a patient or a patient's chart may have been in a picture or something. Someone posted it on Facebook.
Got it.
And
I'm sure like people may not think about that, but
Right.
just the smallest thing, I mean, you could really jeopardize someone's medical information by
Sure.
not being careful.
Have you ever, just out of curiosity, has anybody ever reported to you about somebody accessing that? Not necessarily, hey, this has gotten out, but hey, I think I saw someone accessing this when they shouldn't have. Anything like that ever happen?
I have received a report where someone may have accessed the information based off what they saw on social media, but I don't believe it got too far. I'm not too sure. But yes, I have received maybe like one report where someone was upset because someone had access to their information and they shouldn't have.
And I think we get a lot of those calls, just generally speaking, especially within the workplace, where maybe a family member wants to check out another family member's chart. Family member A is an employee, family member B is a patient, and they use their permissions to go in and check that out, even though they weren't supposed to.
Right.
They weren't the provider, the providing caretaker.
And and just on this topic, I know there are systems actually in place that, especially in the healthcare industry, where they have literally systems to kind of red flag people that are getting into files. And because we have to realize this is not just when you put it out there, it's a HIPAA violation if you access and just view those, even if it's just for your own personal curiosity. And there are systems in place, but it's just something that is so top of mind now. Stories like this, it's just shocking that it has to kind of
this was the next level.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the next level. And I think when employers think of HIPAA violations, they're thinking of like big, massive data breaches, something that's like a super big security issue, like you guys were talking about with the inappropriate access of information. But it really can be just as individualized as this incident was, where it was found with just one patient's complaint or case and escalated, and upon investigation found that there's more than one case here. Right. And so in 2016, a case was opened by the Office of Civil Rights for investigation, and in 2016 that's when it showed it was several patients in November, and it was done without their permission, those patients' permission, so they never gave their authorization to have their information shared on a public space like that. But the investigation was concluded in 2019, October of 2019, and Elite Dental Associates never really claimed liability. They didn't admit guilt, but they did agree to do a corrective action plan within the organization, pay a $10,000 fine, and kind of get some Loctite policies around HIPAA and privacy practices and stuff like that. So, that just shows why those policies are so important. Outside of just social media, what other types of policies should employers have, healthcare or not, to protect themselves?
Well, I mean, there needs to be policies around a lot of things. I think we'll talk about them in some other topics that we have today. But you have to really do your research up front. You have to understand where your vulnerabilities are. And there are a lot of resources out there to support, people that are kind of in the dark or in a gray area and are concerned about these spaces. We certainly can give them advice at Compliance Line. But you really need to think through really where your vulnerabilities are to determine what policies you need to put focus on and put them into place. Make sure they're visible to everyone.
That's it.
Make sure it's in writing. Make sure you're consistent in the application of these policies, because it is a very vulnerable space for all organizations.
Yeah, certainly. And make sure your employees know about it, not just through awareness by reading the policy, signing the policy, but training.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure that there's a training around how do I respond to someone on social media when they ask maybe patient care related questions,
Mhm.
and other things like that. So you brought this up here. You said we can give advice here at Compliance Lines, part of what we do, right?
Mhm.
We have some HIPAA lines, don't we, Darielle?
Yes, we do.
You're not just HIPAA, but I should stop saying HIPAA and start just saying privacy, because it's not always HIPAA, right? So on these privacy lines, how do we handle those calls? Like, are they escalated? Are they special? Tell me about that.
So yes, many of the calls are escalated, depending on which client it is for.
Okay.
We do escalate a lot of calls, depending on how severe it may be. We may need to make a phone notification, just to let someone know, hey, there's a risk that's going on that someone needs to be notified of.
And don't we have some clients that, like, no matter what the incident, just if privacy is brought up, potential privacy violation at all, automatically escalated,
Yes,
right?
Automatically contact their compliance officer as soon as possible.
And I think that's, if whether it's an internal process, reporting process, or an external third-party vendor, that's something important. Like, learn about it as soon as you can.
Absolutely. And make sure that information is shared to the appropriate leadership areas. Not only escalating it to certain people, depending on the nature of the issue that it is, but also, broadening that notification of the issue so that others are aware that may need, you may need legal, you may need compliance, you need HR involved. So, you need to think through how these are being sent to your organization so that everyone gets put on notice about them as quickly as possible. So you can start taking that corrective action, because we know from experience, our clients that take proactive action when they get these reports are in a much better position than ones that are found out from outside sources or from the media or from other resources, for sure.
And if it's internal, if your compliance department's handling these, then have a tree set up, an email chain set up with legal and these other departments too, so you can send these out to everyone to get that advice or backup if you need that backup. So our next article is very similar to one that we talked about in Horror Stories. Has to do with goodie bags, not the fun trick-or-treat kind though, not the good, chocolate. This is about a physician from a pain clinic in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, who for about 4 years was unnecessarily prescribing medications to patients, not because, and I say unnecessarily, not because those patients had a medical condition requiring those or just needing those medications, but because their insurance covered those medications, those were given to the patients. And these included narcotics. They included painkillers, sedatives, muscle relaxers, anti-inflammatories, and the physician, Dr. Neil Anand, Dr. Anand didn't provide any usage or dosage instructions with these medications, and they are some dangerous medications.
Sure, yes, very much so.
Very controlled too. So those were the goodie bags he was giving out to those guys. Not the kind I like. I want the candy. I want the candy, not something that you want to find in your trick or treat bag. So they associated, these goodie bags. They kind of accused him of running a pill mill within his organization or within his physician's office, saying that he was leaving signed prescription pads around his office and, then also giving those medications to people who didn't need them. But just cherry on top is the prescription pads too, like ready to go for anybody who wants one.
Wow.
So I'm stumbling over my words just because I can't believe this still happens. I was just talking the other day about how it's great that I think these controlled substances are so controlled and regulated now, as they should be, because they are very dangerous. This gentleman was just, Dr. Anand did not care.
Yeah, and it looks like he was, taking advantage of the system and absolutely being fraudulent. I believe I read in the article, this is a mental health and pain clinic.
Right.
So when you get into mental health, and especially medications around, prescribing for mental health issues, for a lot, it's a trial and error kind of a process, because some work for some, not for others. So, in legitimate practices, you kind of have to, have a goodie bag, if you will, not all at once.
Yeah.
But, and it's a very prescribed process. It should be monitored very tightly. Obviously, Dr. Anand was taking advantage of that and really blurring the lines. I'm sure his argument was that he was kind of, giving them options to kind of work through.
I'm trying to help.
There's all kinds of ways. But, I think that's why it's important, and I'm not certain it would work in this situation, to make sure that people that know about these things that are happening, because there had to be some employees that knew about it. Some were actually caught up in this as well, right?
Right. And so it wasn't just Dr. Anand who was found guilty or accused of running this pill mill operation. The other people were charged as well. 2 of those were foreign trained doctors who were not licensed in the United States or trained in the United States, and a nurse as well. So a nurse and 2 other physicians.
Yeah.
And they were caught up in it. Dr. Anand, it seems just from reading the article that he, maybe was found most guilty and he was denied bond. So as this wrapped up the U.S. Attorney General's investigation, he was charged with felony counts of healthcare fraud and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. And this is just another little part here. So his scam cost healthcare benefit programs more than $4 million.
Wow.
I mean, average that out $1 million a year
for
this stuff, just to get some extra meds out there.
And this is just one little example.
That's right.
And that's a significant number. It's kind of clarifies why healthcare management is so difficult. And especially when you create blanket coverages, it makes it very challenging when, people can inadvertently have errors and waste and fraud and things, but fraudulent activity like this, I mean, even a whistleblower policy and having the ability for whistleblowers to speak up about these things. It's also kind of a top-down mentality. People look to their next manager and up their chain of command, if you will, to understand what's right and wrong in this organization. And if I do speak up, are they going to listen? And in this situation, it sounds like it's one of those top-down, corrupt organizations and cultures that even if you had that situation, it may not have worked. So, it really starts at the top as far as the culture and the ethics in an organization.
And that just brings up, why don't people feel comfortable, employees, why don't they feel comfortable when they see these bad things happening within their organizations, things they know are illegal or are against policy? What stops them and prevents them from talking?
Definitely the fear of retaliation.
Yeah.
Definitely fearing, hey, I was trained to follow this process and I know that it's not what I'm supposed to be doing legally, but I don't want to lose my job because I fear that if I say something, I'm going to be terminated for speaking up.
So why not just, okay, you find a new job, maybe you don't like working there, you find a new job and call in then, why do you hear about calls like that where maybe people have left the organization and then they're doing their tell-all?
Yes, and they still want to remain anonymous because they fear, being blacklisted in the industry that they work in or in the area.
Right.
And so it's definitely understanding.
So I guess, my mentality is just like, well, I'm an employee here at this facility. If I'm going to be retaliated against, it's specific to this facility I'm working at. I guess I never thought about it in the terms of medical industry and that career field. That's a big field, and I guess the fear to the word spread that I tell when things go wrong, and nobody wants to hire me after that.
Yeah, my wife is actually in the healthcare industry, and they rely heavily on referrals and references in that industry. So that's why there is that absolute fear that even if I do this after the fact, if they find out it's me, there goes the reference that I need to move into my next role. So it's a challenging situation for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, we do allow our callers here to be anonymous. I think that's probably primarily what our callers are. What kind of reassurance would you give a caller if they're expressing a fear of retaliation, or more so just like, how can you assure them that they'll be anonymous here?
So I definitely, let them know at the beginning of the call, our calls are not recorded, they're not traced. So you don't have to worry about, your employer calling in and saying, hey, I want to listen to this phone call
Yeah.
so I can see whose voice that was. Also, we let them know I don't reference your gender throughout the report.
Okay.
So, we refer to you as him or her, or he or she throughout the reporting process. So, if you're the only female in the office or the only male in the office, it doesn't pinpoint you.
Right. So that, I mean, I'm sure that that's reassuring, the gender
Right.
piece especially.
Right.
That, because I'm sure that, maybe within a very female-oriented field, if a male speaks up, that could be quite fearful.
Right.
Sure. And it's that, I mean, whether you run your own reporting system internally, whether you have a third party, frankly, hopefully, most of these issues are going to come to light through normal channels and
Yes.
internally.
Yes.
So it's important. This is another, training and policy situation that we're looking at. Have specific policies and make sure, especially the people that are receiving this feedback and getting put on notice about these things that are happening, that they're very sensitive to very detailed things like their gender, their departments. Yes. They might not want to get too specific on specifically where they are in the organization.
Right.
Unfortunately, you have to have some information to investigate on the other side. So again, that's something else, what we do here at Compliance Line obviously is very beneficial to our clients, that we become a liaison between an anonymous reporter and that employer, so that if all the information is not there up front, we were able to gather what they were comfortable with, we don't lose them. Right. We continue that dialogue.
Yeah, and so they can call back. We can have the caller answer any additional questions that they're comfortable answering, and then that investigation can be fully completed.
Yep, absolutely.
In all hopes. So, have you gotten? When I was on the phones, I heard calls about drug diversion a lot. So, employees were stealing medication from within. Maybe someone who was distributing medications within a facility, they would slip a little in their pocket and go home with it. Have you heard about, but I've never heard about anybody over prescribing. Have you heard about calls like that?
I can't say that I've heard too many calls about over prescribing. I have heard of, providers giving medication to customers or patients that didn't necessarily need it.
Okay.
But typically, the employees usually don't report this just because they fear retaliation, of course. So it's usually maybe a third party, a security guard or someone that's calling in because they overheard something happening.
Maybe like a family member who
saw. Yeah, and especially in healthcare. So we have a lot of patient lines where these aren't just available to employees. They can be available to vendors, to any, stakeholder that is participant with an organization. That could be a patient, a customer, and a family member.
So I think that's important too. Internal or external reporting solution. Make sure that you're open and available to all affiliates.
Yes, absolutely.
So visitors, even just a visitor who may have saw something happening. I think that we get calls like that. I know we do all the time. It's maybe it's a neighbor of a facility who sees some weird things happening over there. It's not always just the direct affiliates.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm glad that we're talking about retaliation here, because I think that it's a big reason why we don't hear about more of this stuff, right? So what can an employer, what kind of expectations do you think that an employer has of their own organizational policies to handle retaliation? So, what do those policies look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, with publicly traded companies, I mean, there are retaliation laws against that. So you have to make sure your employees are educated about that. Make sure, frankly, it's on the individual organizations to develop those policies and really promote those policies and make sure their employees know that they will not be retaliated against, because it is such a valuable resource to have your employees sharing information and speaking up about that information. And if an organization tries to negatively deal with a situation from a whistleblower by retaliating against them, not only is that going to look very bad to that employer, but the other employees are going to know it.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the things as we take calls in our contact center, we want to know, hey, how did you hear about us? And oftentimes one of the best things you can hear is another employee referred me.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So the act of retaliating against a whistleblower is going to not only cause an issue in that situation, but that will spread amongst the organization and amongst the employees of that organization.
Yeah.
And their confidence to speak up will then be diminished or go away altogether.
Yeah, you don't want to cause distrust.
Right. And you lose that resource as a resource for information about things that an organization typically is going to want to address,
Yeah.
take corrective action. I mean, you know, we're going to talk about this here in a minute about the Me Too movement. You know, these things can escalate tremendously, and
Absolutely.
it's best for negative issues to be handled by an organization within their four walls before it goes outside to a legal counsel or to the media,
Right.
or other entities that would be much more detrimental to the organization than them distilling of themselves.
Absolutely. And I mean, all the articles today we're talking about, obviously they made it to the media.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, you have reputation to protect.
Yep.
When it gets to the media, that's everyone.
Right.
You know, that's not just your employee base or your customer base. That is everyone who could have potentially wanted to use your services one day down the line.
Yep,
Right.
absolutely.
So before we wrap up, just to kind of close up this article here, Dr. Anand was so charged with, again, felony counts of healthcare fraud, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, and he was denied bond. Those other three individuals who were involved in this case, they were released on a $50,000 bond. So I also read in one of the articles, there was a couple articles I found about this case, that Dr. Anand's lawyer was very adamant that he would not be found guilty for these issues, and he would be released. He would be let go scot-free. Yeah. And it's a little scary to think about.
It
Yeah,
is.
absolutely.
Because then he, you know, if there's not if he wasn't properly sanctioned, if that happens,
Yeah.
and he's not properly sanctioned, he can get hired by another provider's office or another employer and do this again.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's a testament as to why it's so important to make sure, especially in this situation in a healthcare organization,
Right.
that, you know, it sounds like he's the principal there, but most organizations will have the ability to do exclusion screening on a regular basis, and not only do that at a federal level, but at a state level as well, because, you know, this can happen in one state. I hear stories all the time about doctors and physicians and care providers moving to another state specifically because they can fly under the radar.
dodge it.
Sometimes they don't check internet or nationally, or they don't check individual different state
Right.
exclusion lists, and now they're practicing again. So another kind of very important aspect of compliance is making sure that you're employing people that should be working in your organization.
And that's you must have watched Horror Stories, because that's exactly what we talked about in Horror
Watched a
Stories.
few.
Yeah, is some of these physicians they got away with it. They moved away. They got another job because that employer did not check. Maybe they just checked a few states around, but didn't check on the other side of the country.
Yep,
You know,
exactly.
if they went from California to Florida, well, they just checked Georgia and South Carolina and maybe like Tennessee, but not the West Coast. So they got away with it, and they did it again. And more, you know, they're kind of the allegations against them compounded.
Wow.
Yeah, it's gotta watch Horror Stories. It was such a good show. So we're gonna move on to our last and final article. This is the kind of the highlight article, because we don't often talk about industries outside of healthcare. This one is outside of healthcare. This is the hospitality industry. So we're talking about lodging and travel, recreation, food and beverage, and just tourism. So that covers a lot of what we do
Very
outside
broad
of,
industry.
you know,
Very broad, yeah.
a lot of what we do outside of work and outside of, you know, with our families. So this has a lot to do with the Me Too movement. You know, since the Weinstein scandal in 2017, the Me Too movement has just exploded on social media. And people are more now than ever, I think, coming forward with their stories about sexual harassment,
Sure.
Whether that be in the workplace or just even harassment in the workplace, or on a personal level. And this specifically has to do with sexual harassment reports in the workplace. In 2018, the EEOC posted a report saying that there's a 13.6% increase in sexual harassment reports. Why do you think that is?
I think it's awareness. You
Yeah.
know, it's a couple of things, but certainly awareness. So when this is, I mean, in that period, and even still today, you the Today Show, speaking of which, was on the news again, Matt Lauer's back. So,
Yeah.
it's
That's
not
true. I saw
going,
that.
it's not going away. And so, it creates top of mind awareness about these things, and it makes people think introspectively about their own situations and their own interactions. I've personally done so myself and kind of thought back through my career, and it just makes you look at it and be more sensitive to those, and that combined with the fact that it's being accepted more so than it ever has.
Right.
So people are more comfortable being part of the crowd, if you will.
Yeah.
And so when they see, hey, I'm not out on a limb. I'm not the oddball here wanting to speak up about this and wanting to get my message out. So I think it's not only the awareness that it's top of mind, the topic's out there, but it's also that other people are coming forward and they're being received very well. Whereas,
I think that's
for
the key.
so long, these things have just been dismissed, and, it's a very high bar to create, proof of this. And, the Harvey Weinstein situation just really flipped that upside down.
Absolutely.
And people understand that people in a powerful situation can manipulate in such a way that, they can really get away with it. And now where people are more receptive, and we've got to be careful, it's a slippery slope. You can't just, I don't think just trust every single thing you hear now.
Right.
Still, things have to be investigated. Exactly.
Answer.
But at least people understand if they come out with that, the initial response isn't going to be, must be made up, or she must be, or he must be trying to get something out of this.
Yeah, they want attention.
Yeah, exactly. People have heard those stories, and I think it's made them more sensitive to the real pain those things cause.
Yeah, because I think, seemingly before this movement, the victims were mostly silenced and the issues were swept under the rug. And as you said, it was just, well, here's an excuse or a reason why this can't be true.
Right.
This must not be true.
Yep.
So I think it's great that, it's kind of started on the internet and the media, and just we've created a culture of it's not taboo to talk about these things anymore.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so within that 13.6%, the largest percent of that percentage, the increase happened within the hospitality sector. So Darielle, you had some personal or good stories about just within those, 4 regions of the hospitality sector, how employees are, seeing the impact that this movement has.
Right.
Tell me about some of that.
I do know that, like in the aviation industry, I have friends who are actually flight attendants, and they've mentioned in the past how pilots or other flight attendants can sexually harass, flight attendants, because they're very vulnerable, especially when they're in like close quarters. Like sometimes they have to share hotels. And so now I do know of a lot of flight attendants or airlines that actually house flight attendants in separate hotels from pilots.
Oh, it's totally different hotels.
Right, totally different hotels.
Wow.
So that prevents a lot of the sexual harassment, complaints and claims and incidents and things like that.
That's a great way that the employers decided, well, like, let's just get ahead of this. We're going to get ahead of this. And that's a solution.
Sure, absolutely. And to her point, I mean, so in the hospitality, so many places, are places of isolation, hotels, if you think about it. There's not a lot of places, to get away physically, let alone just the mental control that managers can have in this space, because the demographic of a lot of the hospitality employees are new to the workforce employees, younger employees, immigrants that have come to the country that have language barriers, and they're working through those. So it is a vulnerable audience, if you will, that really needs protection. And I think why it's so important that you have mechanisms for everyone to speak up, multilingual, so people can speak up in their native language and get these things across. But it's not surprising that this is the space that's seeing the biggest increase.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, the isolation's a big thing. Imagine being midair on a plane and, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong if like flight attendants they're not in like partners, they're not always working with the same person. So they may see a rotation of different crew members. And so someone you may never have seen before comes in your comfortable flight, maybe just turned uncomfortable. Sour.
And I've seen, I travel a lot, so it's not just employees.
So
true. And to your point, you know, I can't tell you how many times I'm coming into a hotel and you see a flight crew come in, and it is the whole crew. You see the pilots, you see flight attendants, and they're all there. They want a good night's sleep.
Yep,
and
they all load the elevator with you.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, you have those kind of situations.
Yeah.
But also, you know, as I travel, you know, it's not hard for, you know, the customers of hospitality to be in a position to harass employees. So it's not just the employers or management. It can be customers. It can be vendors that start to take advantage of those situations. Again, large facilities, you know, segmented areas of the nooks and crannies, and plenty of places where, you know, it's not a team of people always interacting with the vendors that come to deliver things and things of that nature, as well as the customers and guests of these facilities. So you really have to think across the board.
And those customers, they're rotating, you know? So I think that I've seen in the movies, and this isn't like probably the best example, but where customers will call in hotels, will call the front office or service staff and ask for services to their room just to proposition them, you know, some uncomfortable things once they open the door. So that's terrifying. And to your point, that's very isolated. There could be no one else in that hallway. Nobody maybe knows where you went. That's scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I know you mentioned too, a story with the cruise line.
Yes. So I do know of a girl who worked for a cruise line, and she was being harassed by a security guard, onboard security guard. And so every time he would see her on the boat, or maybe getting off of the boat or coming back on the boat, he would stop her to, you know, go through her bag or search her bag, and use the excuse, I'm just trying to keep, you know, everyone safe. But she noticed that he wasn't doing that to everyone else. And so she did complain about it, but she did know that she noticed a pattern because she was the only person being stopped by this one specific, you know, security guard.
And that's just what you said, David, that positional power abuse, you know, because he did. And it was used as an excuse to then harass her. And from what I understand, like, cruise line employees, they're not just on the cruise with us for 7 days. They are on there for months, right? So stuck and unlike maybe flight, they're stuck with the same employees all the time. So this lady had to endure this for how long?
For probably months. I know it had to have been like at least 3 months. It wasn't just like a 7-day or an 8-day cruise. And she wasn't from here. She was from another country. So it's not like she can just, you know, get off of the boat and go back home.
I'm stopping at this port. I'm leaving. I'm gonna get a ticket. So did you ever get to hear about the conclusion of that? What happened?
No, I didn't get to hear about the conclusion, but I do know that it was reported to Human Resources. I'm not sure how they were able to handle it though.
So I mean, you know, as an HR department, when you get a complaint like that, what should the steps be? What do you do?
Well, and preached for years as I've worked in these spaces, the worst thing you can have, other than not having an anonymous process for people to speak up, is having that in place and not following through with that. As we talked about, how do you hear about these services? Word of mouth is one of the best indicators that it's working. The worst thing you can do for that indicator to continue to increase is not respond or not take action or not give feedback to that employee speaking up. So I think it's important that you not only have policies in place, that you resolve these issues and you take steps, you document those, you make sure there's an audit trail, because the clients that work with us use our systems to make sure when these things happen, there's a record of it and there's a database of these. Because what they can do and what compliance departments are able to do is, if there is a lawsuit or something that comes up that's really detrimental to the organization, they can say, okay, when did this happen? Who was it, you know, happening to? You know, where was it occurring? And they can use systems like Compliance Line to actually understand if this happened, if it was reported, and even if this issue was not specifically reported, if they have done their due diligence and they can show, we did get 5 reports of these types of similar issues, and here's what we did, here are the steps we took, here's the training we applied, and when necessary, here we, you know, dismiss some employees, whatever that may be. As long as there is a record of that, even if you're found guilty in that specific instance, the courts are going to be much more lenient on an organization that's doing their best and trying.
So employer protection in this area I think is really important.
Absolutely.
You know, what are employers, what are you as the employer doing to make sure that your organization will be protected when a case like this, comes up? Because the policies are important, making sure those things are widely trained to all employees, maybe not just once when they're hired, but regularly, maybe annually.
Yeah, and this article brings up a very clear point about awareness. So again, I'd mentioned, I believe it is awareness that causes that uptick primarily. Anytime I've worked with clients and rolled out a new anonymous reporting program, or to your point, re-educated employees that it's there, because you can put it in your code of conduct.
Who
most
reads
people
that more than once?
Yeah, and you're getting hired. You're not looking for negative things in your organization.
Right.
You want to come on board. You're looking for everything positive, because any new hire's a little bit probably intimidated and wondering, is this the right decision? Until you get there and work a while, even the employee doesn't know for sure. So they're trying to see the positive. They're trying to be in positive light. So when these issues come up, they're not going to think I need to go right back to my code of conduct. And again, most people know you can go to that resource, but the clients that have programs like this that have been very successful and have employees that are comfortable speaking up, definitely make sure there's no whistleblower retaliation, but they communicate the program on an ongoing basis, and they communicate the program to be available for different topics. So Me Too may be a topic that comes up, and they want to highlight, we don't tolerate harassment. If you know about these things, speak up. Anytime I rolled out an awareness program with one of the clients that I work with these programs, their volume inevitably increases. It spikes for a short period of time after, and it typically levels off. But it's, again, just that top of mind awareness, making people think, even if that topic isn't specific to what their issue is, at least it's getting them thinking. It reminds them, you know what, that hotline is still there. Maybe I should speak up about another topic.
And I think that's really clever from the employer, like their perspective to when you get a harassment case within the organization, then increase your awareness about it. See if there's any more. Is anything else happening that we don't know about?
Absolutely.
And in addition to that, like if the Me Too movement, that was a great example. When that comes up in the media, increase your awareness. See if that's happening. Like kind of use that as an opportunity to check out your organization and make sure that it has its checkup.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just reminds employees of these programs that are in place, whether it be that topic or any other. But when you use a current topic, it's very impactful.
Yeah, and because I mean, you're hearing about it on the news, you're probably talking about it with your friends or your family and seeing it on social media. So then, and I'm sure from the employee's perspective, it's also very comforting and reassuring to see, oh, well, my employer would do something about this if I experienced a situation like this. That's comforting.
That is. Definitely.
And it speaks to, I mean, the opposite would be very frightening. So when this is coming out, it's not like these things don't happen. We all know they happen, whether they be benign in most cases or subtle, they happen. So if an organization is not talking about it and not kind of bringing up and talking about current topics when these kind of things come to light, it makes you concerned that maybe they don't want to know. So being proactive, it not only helps you understand and protects you as an organization, but also helps you foster the culture of ethics in a workplace. Exactly.
Yeah, and so let's talk about this. This doesn't just happen employee to employee. Like we were saying, this happens employee to guest. Employee can harass a guest, or a guest can harass an employee. So I know of a girl who worked at the most magical place in the world, and she was dressed up as a character. And, their costumes are quite large and have a lot of structure to them. Well, this male guest approached her, and he hugged her and squeezed her through the costume so he could actually feel her person, kind of felt her up, and then proceeded to tell everyone that she was a girl. Well, like, how would you know that unless you intentionally felt to see if she was a girl or not?
Right.
So that just shows you, like, employees aren't just being harassed by the people they work with.
Sure.
Because those guests, they're coming and they're going, and they probably have that confidence to know, well, she'll never see me again.
Thousands of people here. I'll never get noticed.
Yeah, I won't get caught.
I'll blend into the crowd.
Yeah.
But that's tremendously challenging to manage for an organization, especially that has, in the hospitality space, you have employees all over your physical facilities in different areas, and their role is to serve the customer.
Right.
So you want to be agreeable, it's challenging. So I guess, that's another one that it comes down to policies and making sure employees know this is not tolerated in our organization, and have policies how you deal with those types of employees, how you notify authorities when it's to that level, for sure. But, it's hospitality. You can ban people from, coming to your facilities. I mean, people that are in, I'm seeing it more and more in sporting venues where people that are misbehaving towards players or towards cheerleaders or to other personnel, staff of those facilities.
Maybe even other guests.
They can be banned, even if they're season ticket holders. So they absolutely are banning people for life from, sports venues.
Because these places, hospitality, it's for fun.
Exactly.
It's meant to have a good time. That's where you go, you relax, you're probably on vacation, or at least enjoying it like a nice weekend with friends and family.
Right.
And the last thing as a guest you want to have to worry about is, I don't know that we'll go into this, but guest to guest harassment, or you want to have a good time.
Right.
Don't get banned.
Absolutely. Don't get banned. Not a good idea.
You want to go back there again.
Yeah. But and that comes back to the policies we're talking about, so that you educate employees that, these things are not tolerated.
Right.
Speak up. It doesn't have to be just internal to our organization.
Right.
Speak up, because, we can take action against our customers as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important for employees to know, that just because it's not another employee harassing you or doing these things that make you uncomfortable doesn't mean that we're not going to still protect you from that.
Absolutely.
Because I think it's really important to awareness. We were talking about that. Make sure that your policies, your employee rights, your patient rights, your customer rights, that they're in publicly posted places.
Absolutely.
That, is it a bathroom? Is it a break room? The people are easily able to find what they should and should not experience within your organization.
Yep.
And then, like, maybe a list of steps. Here's exactly what you can do when or if this happens to you.
Right.
Yep.
Like, if I was that employee, I would have immediately wanted to know, okay, what do I do? What's the first thing I do? Then what's going to happen, and what should I expect?
Right. Yeah.
So I think having that outlined, whether it be in a policy or a training, or on a poster, I think that's really, really important, and would give everyone involved some peace of mind.
And if you think about it, it's just like any other marketing for a product. You're just marketing culture. You're marketing behavior.
Right.
You're marketing ethics. You're marketing acceptable standards within our organization.
Yeah.
And, the one thing I don't like about it, just putting a sign up, hey, here's a place you can report, is after a while, those things become wallpaper. Like,
you didn't even look at them.
Your policies, they're in the break room.
That's a good point.
So, I always encourage my clients to think of this just like you're marketing a product. Get their attention, even if it's a guilt message, or if it's a topic that's in the media, to kind of bring it home. I think even with a poster, it should be not just a poster that you put up and is there. It's a poster you rotate periodically so that it gets their attention. Hey, wait, that's new. What is that? And you can use graphics just like anything else. You market these things.
Make it interesting.
Yeah, and make sure you're promoting your culture and also promoting that you care and you want to hear about things that aren't going the right way.
Because that's what that says. That shows, if you're a guest, that shows, wow, this place, I like this place more, because they care about who works for them.
Yep.
And then it makes your employees probably maybe work a little harder for you.
You would think.
So I think we've answered this question, but for the sake of asking, I'm going to ask it. What is this increase in sexual harassment cases and awareness? What does it mean for employers today?
What does it mean? It means they better pay attention, and they better take action internally, proactively.
Right.
As we mentioned earlier, this is happening in every organization at some level. So the organizations that tend to do best in handling these situations moving forward when they become so public is getting out in front of it.
That's right.
And kind of re-educating, making sure you're up to date. A lot of states have laws around harassment and training and things. A lot of states still don't. You can still be proactive as an organization and use these examples to train employees again, to let them know you're listening and let them know proactively that you're on top of these things.
Yeah, because people know that they can talk about it now.
Yep, exactly.
So they will.
Yep, you're exactly right.
And Darielle, we hear about sexual harassment here, right? Not within our workplace, let's be specific, from our callers.
Right.
They tell us about things that happened, and do we have specific lines that you know of for types of calls like these, or do you hear a lot of these calls?
I don't hear a lot of calls about sexual harassment, but I do get the calls where people are calling to report, hey, my manager sexually harassed me, or hey, I'm being sexually harassed by, a colleague.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely understandable that they want to reach out to, this resource to report it, just so that they can, make sure that the company takes the appropriate actions to stop this from happening, or to, maybe separate that person from the company that's actually
Right.
causing the problem.
You don't want that to happen to anyone else.
Right.
You had to, if you're a victim of that, you had to go through that.
Right.
You don't want that to happen to
Exactly.
anyone else,
You
whether
don't.
you know them or not.
Exactly.
That's not a good thing to think about.
Yeah, and frankly, if this is a concern to an organization, us as a third party are not going to all of a sudden get all those reports of these
Sure.
issues.
Right.
Hopefully you have an organization where it's just going to come forward through the traditional channels, because the best way to hear about any of these types of things is through direct reports and through the chain of command as it exists. We're only here when that breaks down.
Right.
So hopefully, if you're encouraging employees and making them comfortable to report these things,
Mhm.
you're hearing about it before they have to even pick up a phone to call somebody as a third party
Exactly.
example.
And I think, it's nice to have a third party because of that backup. We
Yeah,
are a backup
absolutely.
essentially. And I can think of one line we have, clients can break out any kind of line they want,
Sure.
really. So we had one that was specific for sexual harassment issues. And anytime something happened, it was treated in an escalated manner. It was disseminated, correctly for that organization.
Mhm.
And it's just a nice kind of customized way to handle these incidents and make sure that the organization's staying on top of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about top down, making sure that things are, properly communicated from the most executive branch
Absolutely.
down to the employees. What are some ways that an organization can make sure that there's not corruption at the top?
Well, one way is to make sure that there are the ability to report things that don't go directly to the top. We have the ability as an independent third party to take allegations,
Mhm.
and if they are about an executive at an organization, we work with the client to have policies in place to make sure that they don't get the receipt of that issue, and then it goes to the appropriate people that can handle that. And sometimes it's to the board directly.
Okay.
So you can go kind of around there's a lot of ways you can manage making sure this is communicated. So, and I think more so now today,
Mhm.
people are less acceptive of, we didn't know it was happening.
Yeah.
Because there are so many. I mean, anonymous hotlines have been required by publicly traded companies for 15 plus years now. So we know there are mechanisms that can bring this stuff to light.
Right. So there's not really an excuse for
Exactly,
it happening.
yeah.
And I mean, would you say that it's a viable option to survey employees?
Absolutely.
To say, like, is your management team doing a good job communicating this to you? Are they breaking any rules or any policies?
You can be creative with how you do this,
Mhm.
especially in an anonymous survey, and ask very pointed questions. A good example of one that I've seen in the past was if someone on your team did something that was unethical or borderline acceptable to the organization, but was financially positive for the organization, would they get reprimanded?
Mhm.
Would they get fired? Would they get a wink and a nod, or would they get a pat on the back? So, when you gauge an employee base asking unique questions like that, it can really give you a gauge as to what the culture really looks like in an organization. To your point, it really starts at the top and rolls down from there.
That's right.
Fox News is a prime example. There's a new movie coming out called Bombshell, where they're talking about the sexual harassment and the corruption that was going on within Fox News. And Roger Ailes was the head of Fox News, and it started with him. So it's not surprising that there's allegations throughout that organization.
Yeah, that it trickled down.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very important for an organization to have leadership that is confident to come out. I've worked with clients to literally send individual letters and communications to every employee directly from the
wonderful.
CEO or from an executive that state the policies and what's acceptable and what's not, to really reinforce a top-down message. Because without leadership buying into this and
That's
kind of living it and pushing it down to the organization, it'll fall apart.
Yeah, they're setting the example.
Exactly.
They're showing their employees what's acceptable.
Yep, exactly.
So that only makes sense. And just to kind of wrap up this harassment topic, there's a bunch of ways employers can make sure that they're protecting their organization, protecting their employees, protecting their customers, because I think it could also be an employee harassing a customer case too. We didn't talk about that today, but especially within the hospitality industry, I think that maybe employees would feel as though they can get away with it because customers too are also vulnerable in these situations.
Sure.
Have you ever heard about any incidents like that where, because I haven't, I'm trying to rack my brain to see if I can think of a story, but where a customer has been harassed, like then what does the customer do? How does the customer know to report it?
Sure. Well, hopefully an organization can have a similar reporting process for customers. Most companies have a customer service line.
Mm-hmm.
Manage that to not only have things about my product doesn't work or I had bad service,
Yeah.
but things that are happening.
Something happened to me.
Yeah, or they witnessed something. So, and especially where, thinking of retail, for instance, there's a lot of, loss prevention issues as it pertains to retail. And so you want certainly mechanisms for customers should they see something that doesn't look right, like a register ring up that seemed a little off. They're trying to maybe slip something to the side, and also make that available to vendors, because vendors, as they deliver things, they're going to see things that might tip them off to some things happening in that regard too. So
it goes back to any affiliate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any affiliate should be able to report and should know how to report.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who to tell and what will happen.
Right.
Well, that's all for this episode, guys. I don't have anything else to talk about with this harassment case. I appreciate all of the time and effort you put into helping us with our research and meeting with us today. It's been fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for having us. And thank you to our pre-production team who they put all the hard work into the research of these articles. Not only did they just do research for these 3 articles, but for 6 of them, and we didn't do 3. So thank you for all the hard work done by that team and our post-production team after the fact, who will be prettying up our video and posting it on our social media. With that being said, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We post, articles about compliance in workplaces for employers and for anyone interested in reading them all the time, not just these podcasts. So you can kind of get other compliance news by following us on social media, and you can also find these videos on social media as well if you want to, just watch us in the car on the way home. So check us out. If you want to check out our Go to Stage 2, you can find this video there. And if you want to ask any questions, they should go to Compliance Live at complianceline.com, that tongue twister. So just final reminder, if check out our next episode too. Our next episode will be, I want to say Halloween week, maybe Halloween. I'm not good with the calendar calculations in my head, and I don't have it in front of me. So check out that episode too, where it's probably going to be Amanda and I. Amanda's back. She's on vacation today, so she'll be back hosting us, and we'll have some fun stuff ready for you then too. So just final reminder, if you see something, say something. That's what this is all about. All right. Well, thanks again, guys.
Thank you.